I think we found the issue with this engine.
Right here came out of the intake.
That is so much oil.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we have a special video for you as we are going to be attempting to remove and replace the engine from Larry the Land Rover LR4. Now, this is never going to be an easy task, and there's three main ways in which you can take the engine out of these Land Rovers. Option one is you can lift the entire body off of the frame of the vehicle. Option two is to remove the engine from the bell housing and remove it from the engine bay. And the third option is to take out the engine, transmission, and differential all at once. So immediately with those three options, we're going to have to eliminate one of them. The body off frame method is not going to be possible for us. We simply don't have the workshop. Despite working in a lovely garage provided by First Choice Exteriors, we do not have the facilities of a two-post lift that can lift the body off of the frame once we've detached all of the wiring and all of the bolts that allow us to do that. So that option is out the window. That leaves us with two options. We either disconnect the engine from the transmission, or we take off the engine with the transmission and the differential all connected. So let's get into it and let's start pulling out the way all of the things that we need to access this engine. And yes, that's right, I have my dad joining me for this video. He is a much better mechanic than I ever have been, but I'm excited to learn to see how he approaches such a monstrous project.
Awesome. It's going to be easy. Whip this whole thing out, stick a new one in.
Let's see how this goes.
So the first thing we needed to do was strip down the front end to give us better access to the engine bay. That starts off by taking out the headlights, taking out the front grille, taking off the front bumper, and eventually taking off the front frame.
Okay, so that's the front wheel arches off. And the reason that we need to do that is because underneath that arch is this T40 screw right here that we'll need to take off for us to be able to finally take off this full front bumper. So right now my dad's working on taking some of the underside off. But yeah, we're still making progress, as you can see. As we realized from it being a Minnesota car in the last video, obviously all of these bolts here on the bottom are rusted and rounded. So we are gonna get the grinder out again and rip them off.
Reporting for grinding duty.
Whoa, hey!
Look at that.
That is a Land Rover bumper right there. Three, two, one. Oh, golly.
And another layer comes off.
Look at the progress. What are your thoughts, Dad? Tell him.
I still think we're completely bonkers.
Hey, but this is epic. Look at this. I've never taken a car apart this far so far, and we're doing pretty good.
So after taking off the front, it was time for us to remove the radiator and the cooling system, because you can't take out the engine from the engine bay without doing this. And that requires us to empty the coolant. Now, I probably didn't approach this quite in the right way, and we got coolant everywhere.
I'm pretty messy already, but now it's the real messy part with all the liquids flying everywhere.
I started off by taking off the coolant reservoir bottle that sits on the right-hand side of the engine bay, and it sits very close to the window washer fluid. So we took off both of those bottles so that we had easy access into more of the hoses to be able to drain the rest of the coolant. And as I did that, as you can see, coolant went pretty much everywhere, but we were able to clean it up, no problem.
All right, so we're gonna wrap it up there for now for today. It's like midnight already, but I'd say some epic progress made here today. You also have some concerns about the rust at the back of the engine that we'll have to address. But I still think that this is the right decision. I still think that we are.
Absolutely. I have no concerns at all. It's just so easy to be able to just whip an engine out and put another one in, which just click our fingers, man. And this is internet speed, right?
Okay, ready? You're gonna click your fingers and we're gonna have the engine out in 3, 2, 1.
I wish it was that easy. I still think you're a complete nutter.
All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.
Day 2.
I went down to the bottom of the engine and also took off one of the hoses to drain out the rest of the coolant from the radiator. It was at that point we were able to remove the bolts that hold in the radiator to allow us to pull it up and out. But we ran into a little issue. We realized that also the air conditioning condenser sits on this radiator unit. Now, air conditioning gases can be extremely harmful. They use gases like argon and various different things that if you're exposed to, you can actually get poisoned from. So what we had to do was release them, put a fan near them, and then leave the engine bay where it is, making sure that the whole garage is ventilated while we did so. So after a few minutes, we came back and everything was all good.
So the update is that the radiator is ready to pull out, and the intake is also ready to pull off as well.
Why are we taking off the intake?
Taking off the intake in order to give us more room to be able to disconnect all the harness at the back. And it's one of the potential jacking points to be able to connect to the engine to lift the engine.
Excellent.
At that point, it was time to remove the radiator. As we tried to slide it up, you can see that we were getting a little stuck. The flanges that the radiator mounts sit on were getting stuck and caught on the actual body of the vehicle. And the only way in which we could avoid that was by moving the radiator back and up. But what was in the way? That viscous fan that I spoke about earlier.
All right, now we're taking off the viscous fan so that we can actually get the rad out, because you have to slide it back and up to do it. We don't have the tooling, so we're having to try.
And I was not expecting how difficult this would be. Over time, these bolts are naturally meant to be very tight, but over time, they can seize. And this one was definitely one that had seized. We were using the proper tool, we were yanking on it, hitting it with the hammer, and doing everything that we could. We even threw some WD-40 on there to try and loosen it up, but it took us about 40 minutes just on this one fan bolt to remove it. The reason that they can get so difficult is because they're what's called a clutch bolt, meaning that the fan can still spin while the bolt doesn't undo, but once you break the bolt's seal, you're able to just unscrew it by turning the fan. It's a complex system that I don't know too much about, but it's one that makes it really hard to work on. But after we were able to remove that viscous fan, we were able to finally remove that rad pack.
Oh, yes, finally.
Good thinking, huh?
Shroud off. Oh. Okay, so finally, the rad is officially out. And here is the fairly bare motor. We've still got lots to detach and the bell housing at the back, and then also obviously from the subframe down here.
So already we were making huge progress with this engine bay. And now it was time for us to take off the intake manifold. The reason that we've got to take the intake manifold off is because no matter what decision we decide to make, whether we decide to separate it from the bell housing or take it out with the transmission, we are going to need to have access to the back of that engine. The intake manifold can also just get in the way of our attach points for the engine hoist, so it's got to come off. But we made a huge discovery, almost by accident as we did this. So you can see, as I take off the intake, everything seems fine. But behind the camera, after I take off that intake, you can hear something quite worrying. That's right, there was at least a quart of oil in that intake.
I think we found the issue with this engine. I don't actually quite believe this, and I need to tidy it up quick. So let me explain. You guys just saw me take this intake off finally. There's a good bit I had to remove on the back of like some of the vacuum lines and stuff like that. But here it is. And as I took it out, the intake, it's currently draining oil into there. And this right here came out of the intake. That is so much oil. to be sat in that intake.
Which is probably the thing that has been causing most, if not all, of the problems with this vehicle. If you remember from the video where we took it for its first test drive after we had changed the PCV valves inside of that system, you can see that I commented on how it produced more smoke as I put it under load. And it produced what looked like even fresh oil smoke, which was very, very blue as I accelerated. And that was probably because as I accelerated and opened up the airflow inside of that intake, the oil that was sat at the bottom was getting pulled and sucked up into the engine and burnt off. It's also why when we were sat at idle after we'd changed the PCV valves, there was no smoke coming out of the exhaust. Finally, we had found diagnosis that we'd been looking for this whole time. Now, does that mean that we still need to do an engine replacement? Surely if we'd found the problem, we can just take the oil out, clean it out, and it's all fixed. Well, yes, that could be a way in which we approach this. However, there are some serious things that could have gone wrong in the engine due to this overfilling of oil that we've seen both in the previous video as we drained the oil out of the car and changed the PCV valves, as well as in this video with all of the oil that was in the intake. Oil can get into places that it shouldn't, it can create unnecessary pressure, and it can break different seals in the engine itself. So it's better to be safer than sorry, and we're so far into this process already, we may as well take out the engine. Well, that's what I thought anyway. Wait until the end of the video to see really how far we got with this process. So after taking off the intake and having this wild discovery, we decided that it was going to be best for us to leave the transmission in. In reality, the less that we have to take apart, the quicker this process will be and the more efficient it will be. So taking out the transmission, taking out the differential, and having to remove all of the drive shafts is just not going to be the best option. So with that in mind, we had to take off the wiring harness that sits on the back of the engine, as well as taking off all of the bell housing bolts.
Right now, I am sat where the radiator and the fan used to be, and I'm having to get in and behind the engine right here to remove the top bolts, the top bell housing bolts that are in behind here. These are probably the hardest to kind of get to. There's a lot obviously in the way, and it's like right back in there in the engine. I just don't know how many bolts there are in this bell housing. So that's what we're trying to figure out as we go. It's all kind of by touch and feel, and where we can jam our phones to get pictures of the actual bell housing itself. Let's keep pushing through here and see if we can get some more of these bell housing bolts off.
As we do that, we're able to take things out like the starter motor and make sure that we disconnect everything.
That's commitment right there to the car.
Has this job been easier or harder than you thought?
Oh my goodness, this was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. I have to say this project would not have been possible without the youthful enthusiasm of a younger son.
There's not too much that connects the transmission to the actual engine itself, aside from that wiring harness and a few other oil lines and also maybe some fuel lines in there as well. But all of them are relatively easy to disconnect, either from under the vehicle or by reaching into the back of the engine. But as we were doing it, we kept going back and forth. And the reason for that was one very difficult thing to come to terms with. Inside of the actual engine and clutch, there is a torque converter plate, and that is connected to the engine by 4 bolts. Now, those bolts are located inside of the engine and transmission as they sit together, and obviously are inaccessible without getting access to the flywheel. Now, there's 2 ways in which we can gain access. The first option is by taking off the sump, and the second option is through the inspection window, which is actually designed for you to access those torque bolts. Now, initially I thought, well, the sump shouldn't be too hard to take off. I did it on the LR2 in a previous video on this channel, but that is not the case with this LR4. Taking off the sump on this LR4 is actually an engine out job, believe it or not. The reason for that is because there is a subframe that sits on this LR4, which holds the front differential which is very unlike the LR2. In order to take off the sump, you have to either take down the subframe or obviously lift the engine out. So that eliminated that option. No matter how much I tried to unscrew the different bolts, it just wasn't going to work. So option number 2, the inspection window. Surely that is the best option. Well, I thought so. And we decided to try and find and locate that access window. But in classic Land Rover fashion, they place it in an area that is almost impossible to access with the engine in the engine bay. It's located on the driver's side of the vehicle, and it's all the way back behind the exhaust manifold, the drive shaft, and pretty much anything else that you want. The only way you can really access it is going to be through the wheel well, which we did try, or by removing the exhaust manifold. But there was just not even enough room to do that. So we were stuck. That option now, the second option, was eliminated. We were no longer going to be able to take the engine out by separating it from the bell housing. So it leaves us with one final option. We're going to have to take the engine out with the transmission and with the differential. Now, at this point in the video, I thought that things were starting to turn around. All we needed to do was disconnect the drive shafts, which actually ended up seeming like it was going to be easy, but we ran into one issue that really ground this whole project to a halt. It's not possible to disconnect the front drive shaft from the front differential without removing that subframe. At this point, we made the realization Land Rover truly hadn't made this vehicle to be worked on in any other way apart from removing the body from the frame. That's why they'd put it on that ladder frame system. This was something so hard to come to terms with. Me and my dad had been working for 2 straight days, tirelessly trying to get this engine out, and nothing was going our way. That's not to mention all of the rusty bolts that are under this vehicle that took us so much heating and so much WD-40 to loosen off. It's at this point in the project that you really start to feel disheartened and you start to feel like, what is all the work that I'm doing for? But I think that that's half the battle with these projects. Staying positive, staying excited about the thing that you're working on, and believing that you can achieve something amazing with the project that you've set out to. But unfortunately, this has already been a very long video and it's all that we have time for in this one. So stay tuned on the channel for next week's video where we're going to find out whether we're going to take this to a shop to lift the body off the frame and finally do that engine swap, or whether we're going to stick with the original engine and put everything back together. I hope that you're enjoying doing these videos as much as I am. This series has been so exciting. And comment down below your thoughts on whether you think Land Rover designed this engine and this body in the correct way, or whether they should have made it a little bit easier for us at home DIY mechanics. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.